Welcome, everyone, to our third episode of Radical Thoughts on Innovation. I'm Maya Barber, and I'm here with my co host, John Hall, and our special guest, Laura Schlehuber. Sorry, Laura. All right. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you are as a futurist?
Yes. Yeah, so it's Laura Schlehuber. It's a difficult last name. I've struggled with that my whole life. So no problem at all. So I am a futurist living in Houston. I've been a professional futurist for over 10 years, but I'll start before that. I started my professional career at Ernst& Young as a pension and health and welfare actuary. I was a double major in math and statistics, so I was like really in the weeds with all of that math. And after several years of doing this, I had been using a lot of forecasting tools. Actuarial science is like taking what we know today or putting in assumptions, forecasting that out for as long as all of your employees are going to live, and then finding the present value of that calculation, which is kind of very similar to
Yeah.
forecast in a way. But it was very quantitative only. And the type of consulting that I was doing didn't have really anything to do with the client, what like their actual industry was, really anything like that. It was just kind of a set of assumptions that we had to do. So I started to get a little bit restless with that and wanting to find something else. Um, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I remember I had this project out in Chicago, and I used all of my like breakfast, lunch money allowance to buy magazines at O'Hare and just flip through them and kind of see what else I was interested in. If I'm not going to do actuarial science, where do I want to go? And I found out that I was interested in everything. Like all of this, everything in the science field, everything in anthropology, natural disasters, just anything. It's like I would want to fit into any one of these. And then I ran into an article about, this was in Scientific American magazine. It was about the in-house futurist for Intel at the time. And in this article, this futurist talks about Brian David Johnson. He talks about how it was his job to know all of the elements of Intel that would be potentially coming in to influence them, what they could do internally to influence, not just now, but 10, 15 years down the road. It's very much so like a good industry for foresight, because you need to be making things that are going to be relevant 10, 15 years in the future. So I got a master's degree in foresight. You can get that at the University of Houston and a few other places, but University of Houston actually just celebrated its like 50th year of having the foresight program. So it's the longest running program in the world.
So they had the foresight to start the program. That's great.
Yeah, in the 70s. So futurist, or what foresight is, like the definition of it is the study of change or study of the future, which doesn't give you a whole lot to
Mm.
work on. But it really, that's what it is. There is a studying of the changes that society uh, will take given certain technological influences, societal, economic, political influences, and using that to help your forecasting some of the future. So futurists use this tool in a variety of ways. You might have heard of like Ray Kurzweil, who focuses on AI,
Mm.
or I worked with a group in Alaska a few years ago that wanted to learn foresight to study the impact of climate change, to be able to take what they were seeing and be able to use foresight skills to really understand climate change in that area and then how it impacts the rest of the world. I am a consultant, so I will work with companies on a particular topic, whatever is important to them at the time, and we'll do like a 3 to 6 month kind of project where we're unearthing whatever that topic is, using our typical foresight tools to get to scenarios, and then using those scenarios for whatever it is that they're wanting to do, innovation, strategy, whatever. But
That's
one thing I will say is that if you ever run into a futurist that says that they're predicting the
mm.
future, turn the other way. Like it's impossible to do this, okay? Like no one's going to be able to say they can predict the future. But just because you can't predict, same kind of thing with actuarial science. Just because we can't tell you what that exact number is doesn't mean that there aren't methods, assumptions, and tools to be able to get a much better idea and make more educated decisions today about that future that you can't
Yeah.
predict.
Can you maybe tell us more about what some of those tools and processes are that you use to sort of analyze and interpret the signals from the present and then forecast those into the future? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So the main skill set I would say is scanning. Just say scanning and looking for signals of change. And basically what this is being in the news
Hmm.
every day and getting a good idea of what's going on, not just how things are now, but what are the main changes. So you have to, when I have taught this, scanning is a skill set that takes time to get good at, but also it takes time to understand your environment so well so that you can say, well, that's different. I haven't
Hmm.
seen that kind of thing before. You also need to stay in this scanning skill set so that you can start to place things in time. So there might be an article that's talking about some kind of amazing merger of two tech companies, and you're like, you can see the implications, but if you're in this world, you might know that like still that technology is 5 years down the road before that's going to be coming in and impacting society or corporations. So understanding where things fit over time and using some kind of forecast. You might have to use some kind of forecasting technique for this. A lot of times you will be able to kind of get an idea of how things can mature. But if we just know about how things look today, you might need to use some of that studying of change that we know historically to use some of those assumptions with how it'll look in the future. Once you get these signals of today and you forecast them a bit into the future, you're in the area that you want to explore 10, 15 years out is kind of the sweet spot. Then it'll be about making scenarios. So it's you could have just like 1,000 signals, floating around with what they might look in the future, but it's really helpful for these to turn into a story. That's how
Hmm.
you like remember them, and the scenarios are like fertile playground to like ask questions about the future, to get answers about the future. So they need to be something that you remember. And there's myriad of ways to form scenarios that would be very dependent on what the client wants, if it's something more strategic or more innovative. Um, so scanning, forecasting, and scenarios are the main tools for traditional foresight.
Hmm.
I would like to add that I think that this is a lot of external signals that we're interpreting, and that we've really been missing how to understand this stuff more internally. So, some of the skills that I am bringing in, some of the process I'm bringing in are what I'm calling like embodied intuition.
Hmm.
um, Being able to like sit with this information and really feel how it is in your body, um, to be able to see if you have any like limiting beliefs about it, any blockages about it, and get a better sense of like what's actually going on in this topic, besides just like all of this
Yeah.
noise.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, and I think about our clients, that are, we work with them and want, this kind of perspective to help guide innovation. I mean, how do you, knowing there's so many scenarios out there, how do you balance thinking about what's possible versus what's probable? And then, how does that going to impact sort of your approach to how you would balance, thinking innovatively about new products or services for a client?
Yeah, I love this. Scenarios are like just my favorite part of this whole thing. So it's all about so the scenarios and some of them being more probable and more possible. Normally in a set of scenarios, you normally have 4 to 6. You'll have at least one that is the most probable future, which essentially is just you're taking the trends that got us to today and you forecast them into the future, just kind of along that same trajectory. You can use quantitative forecasting for
Hmm.
this. Um, it's an important future, definitely need to know how to navigate around it, but it oftentimes is not going to be very inspiring or motivating. It's going to feel very constricting.
Hmm.
And then you'll have your other scenarios in the set that will take, a possible shift and explore what that world will look like. What if it looks like if this goes into a complete collapse? What if it leapfrogs into transformation? What if it goes somewhere in the middle? So you would have this very plausible set. And again, like they're still going to have a lot of innovation opportunity. There's still
Hmm.
a lot of things to explore in these different worlds. But I think one of the things that is really important, which we've been doing a lot more in these past few years, is having our clients come up with their preferred future, their aspirational, like without any kind of limits, kind of let all of that go and kind of getting into like a law of attraction manifestation type sense when you're thinking about this aspirational future. So there's this book in the Foresight world that is, I think it was in the 70s, but it's one of them that's kind of in our core literature called Image of the Future
Hmm.
by Fred Pollock. And in this, one of the main premises in this book is that throughout history, societies have not been able to move from one system to another without having a compelling, motivating image to get there. You'll either stay in a baseline or you will go into collapse without that kind of more expansive thinking. And again, just like in general, humans um, we don't really like change.
Hmm.
We're really, and if we do change, most of the time it first is coming out of some kind of suffering.
Hmm.
Like it's so
Yeah,
painful to be here that I'm going to explore whatever that alternative is. But it's a completely different type of change when you're motivated towards something aspirational versus something to avoid.
that's fascinating.
And
Yeah.
Laura, I know you spoke on this just a little, but how do you go about thinking and feeling about the future compared to like analytically thinking and preparing for that future event?
So one of the things that I noticed in these past few years is that it's increasingly difficult to stay on top of the news. And as a futurist, you are trained as well with every piece of information you get to start thinking in implications. If this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and it's just it's a lot. I mean, it's always been a lot, but also with all of like the mixed signals and not knowing what's actually like true data to work with, I think it becomes more and more important to be able to have some kind of internal process to understand this. So, and we can get really, really lost in all of that anxiety as well, and that can make us, do short-term decisions and all of this. So a lot of corporate foresight will stay on the surface with like scanning, trends, forecasting models. But what this does, and I'll get into a little bit more of like what the actual practices are, but really sensing this and sitting with this can help you kind of like understand that gap, like what's missing, what are people not saying, what's being forgotten or repressed, or what's like actually being longed for, what's actually being wanted in this world versus like the noise of all of that, but what's the deep underlying like need of the people. And what I notice is when I'll start to do this practice with people, and it's pretty uncomfortable, for people to be like, you're just going to sit here in silence and breathe really deeply and make noises with it. The first thing that I notice is that there is an extraordinary amount of limiting beliefs about how the world works, what's being said, and just like what you were born with believing. So we teach a lot of this to like sit with this stuff and question this. Is this really true? Is this what I really believed, or is this just something that is ingrained with me? And I think that this practice and a lot of this, like feeling the future versus thinking the future can be very strategic, of course, and very like it has to fall within these guidelines. Just allows for all of the expansiveness in the world, just not having any of those restrictions, but and also being encouraged to think kind of opposite of what you do know, what you think you know.
Well, and I know because you already, have been able to kind of open your mind to possibilities. But I'm just curious when you think about, the opportunity to come up with ideas based on kind of what you're forecasting or seeing in the future, are there any specific resources or practices that you find kind of help you break from sort of conventional thinking to thinking much more innovatively or breakthrough about, again, products or services that might be appropriate in that future scenario?
I don't want to discount any traditional foresight processes. I've spent a lot of years kind of finding like weird, strange places to find data. Again, a lot of it has to do with exposing yourself to things that you're not as comfortable with.
Yeah.
That has been the best practice that I've found for opening that up and finding other ideas. But what I'm talking about with this other area of doing things more internally, it is spiritual work, it's performance, it's energy work. And the three main parts of it are breath work, sound, and movement. Breath work, sound, and movement are like the three basics of Tantra, which is not a practice of sex and pleasure primarily.
Mhm.
It's actually a practice of igniting your creative life force, of
Mhm.
living a certain way with life where you're kind of dancing with it and finding the joy in it and all the time. Breath work, sound, and movement. So and this helps again to like release all of this energy. I found a lot in doing this practice that even with just certain emotions, how your body, can really, really hold on to it. Unless you do some kind of process of letting that move out, it's just energy, you know?
Mhm.
Just let that energy move in and out of that vessel. So I will spend I'll almost every day I will do a practice for 30 to 60 minutes. And it's not all just focused on a foresight topic. This is
Mhm.
just like me breathing into my body and like taking a look at where I might be feeling something in my body and listening in and breathing into it, asking my body what it is that it wants to tell me, how it wants me to show it love, clear
Mhm.
it out. Okay, we're also clearing out our chakras.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm a deep believer in this stuff. I do
Yep.
believe that trauma can sit in these certain areas in your body and that you can clear this out. Um, Also with energy work, one of the things that it does for me, and let me say too, like this practice, what it does is I think it helps connect like our physical material world with kind of more of that metaphysical stuff that is super real and not well understood, but it's like
Mhm.
the key, like has so many promises. So, but one of the big things that energy work will do is to help me come back to that principle that everything and everyone is connected, which is like one of the big principles in foresight in general. That's like a big concept that people have to kind of work through, that nothing goes into the future or moves anywhere in isolation. Everything is connected. So you can't just think of one thing floating into the future without all these other influences. So again, like continuing to understand um, that we're all connected. I'm also a big proponent of having you do things that make you uncomfortable. For me, in this past year, it's been doing a lot of performance art stuff, which
Mhm.
like undoubtedly has been fun. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm picking these extraordinarily like awful things, but on-screen acting classes, dance classes, even burlesque, just things like this that I've never done before. It's not natural, it's uncomfortable, but it's helping me like to really understand myself better. Um, get into the ground, get into I'm an avid gardener, getting your hands into the dirt, releasing a lot of those blocks I think are really important. I mean, again, like this, I know it sounds like can sound like kind of woo-woo, but I think this stuff is incredibly important and complementary to any kind of work. I think that it helps to unveil any subconscious blocks. They're just
Hmm.
going to prevent you from having certain ideas, like you're just not able to think a certain way with these certain blocks. Getting to know yourself at a deeper level is always a good idea.
Hmm.
Is always beneficial. And this practice does help, literally does help kind of create a more creative life force, being more creative
Yeah.
in yourself.
I mean, do
Yeah.
you think that why some people are having trouble kind of thinking about, imagining and thinking more expansively about the future is because they're not going through those steps? Or are there other things that you would say people ought to be doing to really kind of free themselves up to be, more, I don't want to say accurately, but I think more proactively thinking about the future and its implications for their businesses?
I think that a lot of people have difficulty thinking about the future just simply because there's so many limiting beliefs or potentially trauma, that kind of thing. Living in, if you have had a lot of trauma in your life, you literally are not able to really think about a more motivating future, that aspirational future that I was talking about. Um, if you grew up in a community that has been berated, that's been sidelined, that is not getting the resources they need, that's just a really hard stretch to think that one day they're going to be living in absolute abundance and taking those steps to do it. Likewise, on the opposite end of that, a few years ago, I did this training for a group of law enforcement in the UAE.
Mm.
And we were going through this scenario routine, and I was trying to explain that baseline future. You take those trends of today and forecast it out. 9 times out of 10, that's a rather dull,
Hmm.
not motivating future. But for the UAE, their past 50 years have been transformation. It has
Hmm.
been from a desert of nothingness to first class, best airport, tourism, all this stuff. So, yeah, their baseline is like everyone else's transformation.
Hmm.
That's just what they're used to. So, if you're unable to imagine a more prosperous future, you can just kind of full stop right there. Like it just you have to have some kind of compelling idea. What I noticed in corporations or how that kind of translates to corporations is that a lot of times they will be acting out of a state of constant urgency.
Hmm.
So which will lead to reactive short-term decisions. A lot of what we're seeing right now is the culture of overwork and
Hmm.
fear, just definitely not definitely doesn't help does not help the system. um and like we were talking about a little bit before, when you have any kind of length of period of short-term thinking, it can really kill that foresight capacity.
Hmm.
I have had several clients where that's their story, where we had to start getting internal, we had to cut off this capacity, we couldn't hire anybody externally, so we had to just start rotating innovation ideas internally. And I remember one of the clients saying is like, we know we can nail a single or a double, but we have lost the ability to hit a home run. We don't know
Hmm.
how to do it anymore.
Yeah, I also think a lot of them, their time horizons are so short. I mean, for them, long term is 2 to 3 years, and
That's right.
that's very limiting in and of itself.
That's right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I really love about foresight is that it kind of you can't like ask people of today as much, what it is. Like you have to
Mhm.
use these processes to kind of get there to immerse yourself in that future world and then kind of find out what's missing or what people desire there. Yeah.
Very interesting.
And Laura, I know you're really big into like tapping into yourself and like basically if you're not whole, like your work's not going to be whole. So going forward into the future, how can people and companies stay innovative? And then how can leaders help create that environment so their coworkers can stay innovative as well with their employees?
So again, don't want to discount any of the traditional foresight work and staying in the know of what's going on and being able to interpret signals that way to be able to place it through time. But I will reiterate these points that I think that embodied intuition being one, like learning to really listen to your intuition or your gut instinct is a skill that we have lost again with all of this external information coming at you. It's really difficult to kind of remain that like locus of control and autonomy over what's actually right. Also, another one that we could all do well to expand on is emotional resilience. Not seeing emotions as something to be handled or stuffed or what's, appropriate in certain areas, but letting it be signs that tell you things,
Hmm.
letting that be something that you work with instead of shutting down. I'm a big, big proponent of playfulness and curiosity. So I want to see more opportunity for people to just hang out and have permission to just be an expansive wonder without that feeling of productivity being there. So I think you'll have to normalize emotion. Again, like it not something where, someone's having a bad day and they're allowed to just let it out. Again, it's an emotional resilience and maturity where people would understand that this is something they're being told something with this. They don't need to be reactive with it. Um, Definitely continue. They need to continue to stretch themselves into uncomfortable places. Bring people in that if you're not used to doing like the weird and uncomfortable, bringing someone in that can kind of help to create that space for that non-linear exploration. So I believe that the most future ready leaders are going to be able to regulate their nervous systems, be able to stay present in discomfort, to be able to like feel even comfortable in discomfort, and be able to listen with their whole selves, head, ears, and whole body. So yes, we need data literacy, we need systems thinking, but we definitely still need embodiment, intuition, and emotional range.
That's great.
And we're getting close to time here. So, Laura, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. And thank you guys for all tuning in. Stay tuned for our next episode of Radical Thoughts on Innovation for their next special guest from one of John's brain trusted radical thinkers. Thank you all.